The house lights dimmed at the Grand Ole Opry on March 23, 1987, and 14,000 people fell into that electric silence that comes just before Johnny Cash takes the stage. But backstage, the man in black was frozen, staring at a security monitor with tears already forming in his eyes, because there, in the third row, sat a ghost from 1969, a Marine whose face Cash had carried in his memory for 18 years. "June," Cash whispered to his wife, his voice breaking. "That's him. That's the kid from Long Bin." What happened over the next 16 minutes would become one of the most powerful moments ever witnessed at the Opry, leaving not just the audience in tears, but creating ripples that would touch thousands of veterans' lives for decades to come. To understand what made grown men sob openly that night, you have to go back to January 11th, 1969. Johnny Cash had just landed at Long Bin Post in Vietnam, the massive military base 20 miles northeast of Saigon. The temperature hit 102 degrees, and the air hung thick with diesel fumes and red dust. Cash had come against the advice of his management, his record label, even some family members. The war was deeply unpopular. Protesters were calling soldiers baby killers, but Cash didn't care about politics. He cared about those boys dying 9,000 miles from home. "I'm not here to debate the war," Cash told the assembled troops that first night, standing on a makeshift stage built from ammunition crates. "I'm here because you're here." Among the 700 Marines and soldiers crowded into that outdoor amphitheater sat 19-year-old Lance Corporal Tommy Rodriguez from Bakersfield, California. Rodriguez had been in country for 11 months. He'd lost 42 pounds. He'd watched 6 friends die. And just 3 days earlier, he'd received a Dear John letter from his high school sweetheart. "I was done," Rodriguez would later tell a documentary crew. "I mean spiritually done. I'd already written my goodbye letters home. I was going to volunteer for every dangerous patrol until one of them got me." That's the headspace I was in when Johnny Cash walked onto that stage. Cash opened with Folsom Prison Blues, his voice cutting through the humid night air like a blade. But something made him stop mid-song. He'd noticed Rodriguez in the front row, this kid who looked hollow, whose eyes had that 1,000-yard stare Cash recognized from his own battles with darkness. "Son," Cash said, pointing directly at Rodriguez. "What's your name?" "Lance Corporal Rodriguez, sir." "Where are you from, Rodriguez?" "Bakersfield, California, sir." Cash stepped down from the stage. His security detail immediately tensed and walked straight to Rodriguez. The entire crowd went silent. You could hear the distant thump of helicopter rotors and nothing else. "How long you been here, son?" 11 months, sir." Cash put his hand on Rodriguez's shoulder. "You hanging in there?" Rodriguez tried to answer, but his voice cracked. He just shook his head no. What Cash did next wasn't in any script. He pulled Rodriguez into a bear hug, right there in front of 700 battle-hardened Marines, and he held him while this 19-year-old kid from Bakersfield broke down completely. "It's okay, son," Cash said loud enough for everyone to hear. "It's okay to not be okay. Every one of you boys, it's okay to not be okay." Then Cash did something that would become legend among Vietnam veterans. He brought Rodriguez up on stage, sat him on an ammunition crate, and sang "Bridge Over Troubled Water" directly to him. By the second verse, you could see tears streaming down the faces of Marines who hadn't cried since basic training. After the show, Cash spent 3 hours with Rodriguez just talking. They talked about home, about fear, about God, about surviving when you don't want to survive. Before Cash left, he made Rodriguez promise something. "You promise me you'll make it home," Cash said. "And when you do, you come find me. We'll have dinner, you and me, in June. Promise me." Rodriguez promised. But here's the incredible part. Cash gave him something that night. He took off his black leather wristband, the one June had given him, and put it on Rodriguez's wrist. "This got me through my darkest times," Cash said. "Now it's going to get you through yours." Rodriguez survived. He made it home in March of 1970. But he never went to find Johnny Cash. Shame, survivor's guilt, the weight of what he'd seen and done. It all kept him away. He moved to Nashville, got married, had 3 kids, and built a successful construction business. But he never reached out to Cash, even though he still wore that leather wristband every single day. Fast forward to March 23rd, 1987. Rodriguez's daughter Sarah had surprised him with tickets to see Johnny Cash at the Grand Ole Opry for his 49th birthday. Rodriguez had resisted at first, but Sarah wouldn't take no for an answer. "Dad, you've been telling me about Johnny Cash my whole life," she said. "We're going." So there sat Rodriguez, 18 years older, 30 pounds heavier, grey creeping into his hair, still wearing that weathered leather wristband under his dress shirt. He thought he'd just be another face in the crowd of 14,000. He thought wrong, because Johnny Cash never forgot a face from Vietnam. Never. The moment Cash spotted Rodriguez on that security monitor, everything stopped. His longtime guitarist, Bob Wooten, remembered what happened next. "Johnny just stood there shaking," Wooten said. June asked him what was wrong, and he pointed at the monitor and said, "That Marine from Long Bin, the one I gave my wristband to. He's here. He kept his promise." Cash was supposed to open with Ring of Fire. Instead, he walked out onto that stage, 14,000 people erupting in applause, and raised his hand for silence. "Folks," Cash began, his deep voice trembling slightly, "I need to tell you something. 18 years ago, I met a young Marine in Vietnam who was in the darkest place a person can be. I made him promise to survive and come find me when he got home." The spotlight operators didn't know what was happening. The band looked confused. June stood in the wings with her hand over her mouth. "I just saw him," Cash continued. "He's here tonight. Lance Corporal Rodriguez. I know you're out there. Tommy Rodriguez from Bakersfield." "Will you stand up, son?" Rodriguez felt every eye in the Opry turned toward him. His daughter grabbed his arm. "Dad, is he talking about you?" For a moment, Rodriguez couldn't move. Then slowly, he stood. The spotlight found him, and Cash's face transformed. You could see recognition, joy, and 18 years of wondering flash across his features. "Tommy," Cash said, his voice breaking completely now, "you kept your promise." What happened next had never happened in the 50-year history of the Grand Ole Opry. Cash stepped down from the stage and started walking up the aisle. Security scrambled to follow. The audience parted like the Red Sea. And Johnny Cash, the man in black, walked straight to Tommy Rodriguez. They stood face to face for a moment, these two men who'd shared one night in hell 18 years ago. Then Rodriguez held up his wrist, pulling back his sleeve to reveal the weathered leather band. "I never took it off, Mr. Cash. Not once." Cash pulled Rodriguez into the same bear hug he'd given him in Vietnam, and this time both men wept openly. The entire Opry, 14,000 people, burst into applause that lasted 4 full minutes. But here's what the audience couldn't hear, what only Rodriguez heard because Cash whispered it in his ear. "You saved my life too, son. That night in Vietnam, I was fighting my own demons. Holding you, helping you, it reminded me why I needed to stay clean, stay alive. You saved my life too." Cash brought Rodriguez up on stage. He had him sit on a stool, just like that ammunition crate 18 years ago. And then, without any rehearsal, without any plan, Cash sang "Bridge Over Troubled Water" again, the same song from that night in Long Bin. By the second verse, you could hear sobbing throughout the Opry. Veterans in the audience stood at attention, tears streaming down their faces. June Carter Cash walked out, took Rodriguez's hand, and stood there holding it while her husband sang. When the song ended, the silence was complete. Then, Rodriguez spoke into the microphone Cash held toward him. "Mr. Cash," Rodriguez said, his voice steady despite the tears, "I need to tell you something. After I came home, I started a support group for Vietnam vets. Just a few guys meeting in my garage at first. But I told them about that night, about what you said, that it's okay to not be okay. That group now has over 3,000 members across Tennessee. We've saved lives, Mr. Cash. What you did that night, it didn't just save me, It saved thousands. Cash had to turn away from the audience to compose himself. When he turned back, he said something that would become one of his most quoted statements about Vietnam. "Folks, we sent boys to war and expected them to come back as men. But they came back as warriors carrying wounds we couldn't see. Every single veteran in this audience, everyone listening at home, I want you to know something. Your country might have forgotten to say it, but I won't. Thank you for your service. Thank you for your sacrifice, and thank you for surviving." The standing ovation lasted 7 minutes. Veterans throughout the Opry embraced each other. June Carter Cash later said she'd never seen anything like it in all her years in country music. But the story doesn't end there. After the show, Cash and Rodriguez spent 3 hours backstage, catching up on 18 years of life. Rodriguez introduced Cash to his daughter Sarah, the one who'd bought the tickets. Cash learned that Rodriguez had named his son John after him. He learned about the support group, about the wives who'd called to say their husbands were alive because of what Rodriguez shared from that night in Vietnam. Then Cash did something extraordinary. He was scheduled to do a tour, 22 cities over 2 months. He invited Rodriguez to join him, to speak before each show about veterans' mental health, about the invisible wounds of war. "We're going to shine a light on this," Cash told him. "No more shadows." Rodriguez joined that tour. At every stop he spoke for 10 minutes before Cash took the stage. He told the story of Long Bin, of the promise, of the leather wristband. He gave out hotline numbers. He connected veterans with local support groups. By the end of the tour, Rodriguez's organization had chapters in all 22 cities. CBS Evening News picked up the story. Dan Rather interviewed both men. The segment won an Emmy. But more importantly, the Veterans Administration reported a 40% increase in veterans seeking mental health support in the months following the broadcast. Cash and Rodriguez remained close until Cash's death in 2003. Rodriguez was one of the pallbearers at his funeral. In Cash's will, he left Rodriguez his guitar from the Vietnam tour with a note that read, "For Tommy, who kept his promise and helped me keep mine." Today, that guitar hangs in Rodriguez's office at the Veteran Support Network headquarters in Nashville, an organization that now helps over 100,000 veterans annually. Rodriguez, now 74, still wears the leather wristband. It's held together with surgical tape now, weathered and worn, but unbroken. "People ask me why I never took it off," Rodriguez said in a recent interview. "It's because that wristband represents something bigger than just a gift from Johnny Cash. It represents the moment when one human being saw another human being drowning and threw them a lifeline. That's what we all need to be for each other, lifelines in the darkness." The reunion at the Grand Ole Opry has been viewed over 80 million times on YouTube. Comments pour in daily from veterans and their families, sharing how the video helped them seek help, saved their marriages, saved their lives. Sarah Rodriguez, now 55, and the executive director of her father's organization, reads every single comment. "That night at the Opry changed everything," she said. "Not just for my dad, but for thousands of families. Johnny Cash didn't just sing songs. He threw lifelines. And my dad caught his and then threw it to others. That's the ripple effect of compassion." But perhaps the most powerful epilogue to this story came in 2018, when Rodriguez received a letter from a young Marine who just returned from Afghanistan. The Marine wrote that he'd been sitting in his apartment with a loaded pistol, ready to end everything, when his grandmother sent him the YouTube video of the Opry reunion. He watched Cash and Rodriguez embrace. He heard the words, "It's okay to not be okay." He put down the gun and called the Veterans Support Network hotline. That Marine is now a counselor with the organization, helping other veterans find their way home from their own darkness. This is the power of recognition, not just recognizing a face in a crowd, but recognizing the human being behind the uniform, behind the success, behind the struggle. Johnny Cash saw Tommy Rodriguez in that crowd in Vietnam, really saw him. and 18 years later he saw him again. That simple act of seeing, of remembering, of caring enough to stop everything and acknowledge another human being's pain and survival, that act saved lives. It continues to save lives, too. Because here's what Johnny Cash understood that night at Long Bin and proved that night at the Opry. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do for another human being is to simply say, "I see you, I remember you, you matter." 14,000 people sobbed at the Grand Ole Opry that night because they witnessed something increasingly rare in our world: genuine, unscripted human connection. They saw two men who'd met in hell create a moment of heaven. They saw that love and recognition can transcend time, distance, and trauma. And maybe, just maybe, they saw themselves in that embrace, the parts of themselves that needed to be seen, to be remembered, to be told, it's okay to not be okay. The leather wristband that Johnny Cash gave Tommy Rodriguez in Vietnam has become something of a legend among veterans. Some say it's just old leather and worn thread, but Rodriguez knows better. It's proof that in our darkest moments, someone can reach out and pull us back to the light. And once we're back in that light, it becomes our responsibility to reach back into the darkness for others. That's what Johnny Cash did in Vietnam. That's what he did again at the Opry. And that's what Tommy Rodriguez has done every day since. The reunion had 14,000 sobbing because it reminded us all of a fundamental truth. We are not alone in our darkness. Someone, somewhere, remembers us. Someone, somewhere, is keeping their promise to survive. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, we get to witness the moment when those promises are fulfilled. If this story moved you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Comment below if you've ever had someone throw you a lifeline when you needed it most. And remember, it's okay to not be okay. But it's not okay to go through it alone. Because somewhere out there, someone is wearing their own version of that leather wristband, holding on, keeping their promise to survive. And maybe, just maybe, your share of this story will be the reminder they need that their survival matters, their story matters. And they matter, just like Johnny Cash knew Tommy Rodriguez mattered on that humid night in Vietnam. Just like he knew it again 18 years later at the Grand Ole Opry. Just like we all matter to someone, somewhere, even when we can't see it ourselves. That's the real reason 14,000 people sobbed that night. They weren't just witnessing a reunion. They were witnessing proof that love transcends time, that promises can be kept, and that sometimes, against all odds, we really do find our way back to each other. And in a world that often feels too dark, too disconnected, too harsh, that's everything.